Today, we might finally learn who let the dogs out.
Who let the pups out? Who let the pups out? Who let the pups out? Who let the pups out?
I'm just kidding. But today we are talking about, are mold dogs effective? Here's the truth. Mold dogs are becoming an increasingly popular tool to identify mold in a home. It's kind of a fun, creative solution that is non-invasive and can identify mold potentially. And rightfully so. Dogs are used by various government agencies to detect narcotics, bombs, and even stop people who are dangerous. Dogs can be a really useful tool. And because of that, there's this idea that they can be used to detect mold. Now, I'm gonna save my opinion for the conclusion of this video, but let's dive into the science. The first thing to note, in the last 20 years, there are only 2 major peer-reviewed studies of these mold detection dogs. These dogs were shown various building materials, some clean, some contaminated, and they were contaminated with spores that are commonly found amongst water damage. So your aspergillus, your penicillium, your cladosporium, stachybotrys, all types of really dirty, nasty, gross building materials. And the dog's jobs were to go in there and identify whether or not wood was contaminated or not. I concluded that a lot of these studies used wood, but when they introduced maybe a new material such as, I don't know, drywall, the dog's accuracy started to drop. But it doesn't mean that the dog didn't identify it. It just means that on average, the accuracy of them identifying it did drop a little bit, and rightfully so. It just might be that the dog just wasn't trained on that material. It's important to note that these dogs, they're not actually identifying how many spores, whether the spore's alive or dead. They're really only to identify the odor or mycotoxins from the mold. In the field, these handlers essentially walk the dogs through a house, and the dog will give various cues of whether or not it thinks they have mold. Maybe it'll bark, maybe it'll sit, maybe it'll point its nose. It depends on how the dog is trained, but essentially when it does one of those cues, it's saying, hey, I think this spot might have mold. Now, it's also important to note that there's actually no single government regulation or universal certification standard for these dogs. And this means that the process of how one dog's trained at one company might be different from how another dog's trained at another company. So there's no real consistency here, which is something to note. Now, the 2 studies, one of them is called, and forgive me if I say this wrong, it's called Kauhanen, and then the Griffith study, I'm pretty sure. They did these studies in various different ways. They tested them with contaminated building material with mold growth and then non-contaminated. And they basically just had these dogs try to identify which is which. And then they tracked at what % did the dog identify clean and what % did the dog identify contaminated. And then they compared the 2 quantitatively. And these are the only studies, as far as I've been able to find, that involve dogs identifying microbial growth amongst building material. Nothing has been done independent peer reviewed or a larger scale study in the US that I have been able to find. A lot of research out there continues to reference these 2 studies, which, as mentioned before, were done over 20 years ago. These studies did a few different methods and tactics to measure these dogs' performance, but on average, the dogs were able to detect contaminated building materials 75% of the time, which means they correctly found real growth 3 out of 4 times, missed real growth 25%, or more in some of the tests that they did. When they did alert, false positives were low. These dogs performed better on the training material that they actually were trained on, not as well on different materials, substrates, and conditions. Now, mold dog detection companies will tell you that their numbers are 90% or more. But it's important to note that these numbers are from internal trainings or selective references from the older studies that we talked about. In real buildings, there are a lot of extra variables. There's different pressures and airflow, other smells. There are definitely a lot more distractions that these controlled studies don't necessarily factor in. So in conclusion, well-trained mold dogs can reliably alert to hidden microbial odors in many cases based on those 2 studies. But these are only 2 studies from 20 years ago, and results are going to really depend on training and training conditions and the handlers, which again, as we discussed, there are no formal government certifications or regulation on how these dogs are trained. these dogs should be used as a multi-effort solution to identify mold. Use these dogs along with a licensed and certified mold assessor. Use these dogs with moisture meters and thorough visual inspections as well. My personal and professional opinion on the matter, I think that we need much more science and case studies around this before we start talking about accuracy at 90 to 100%. I think that these dogs can be used as an additional tool, but I don't think that they should be used as a sole isolated solution to identifying mold. All that being said, guys, thanks for watching the video this far. Really appreciate it. If you guys want to like, subscribe, leave a comment below. What do you think about mold dogs? Thanks for watching.
Howling.